Christine Daigle and JD Barker. Welcome to the show.
Hey
Thanks.
man, how you doing?
Doing good. The band is back together again. Not the entire band, but a chunk of the band is back.
Just about. It's like a reunion special.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, for those not in the know, I was a co-host on Writers Inc. for about a year. And it was JD and Christine and a few more, and always had fun, always had a few laughs, and it's always a good time. So I miss you guys. So I'm glad you agreed to be on the show today.
Yeah. Appreciate you
Oh,
having
thank.
us.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's start out with you guys recently came back from Author Nation. It was the inaugural launch of Author Nation in Las Vegas. I think they billed it as the largest indie author event in the world. What are your what's your takebacks from that?
I mean, for me, this was the first time I'd ever gone there. I didn't go to 20 books at all. I was honestly told to stay away from it, being, primarily in the traditional world. It was something that was kind of kept off my radar. But I've always kind of kept an eye on it,
Yeah.
because of what they do there. And honestly, the real kicker for me is, I've been to pretty much every conference, I think, in the country at this point, like all the big ones. And for the most part, a lot of the bigger conferences are really geared towards two groups. They're great at, promoting debut authors, and they're fantastic at, taking the high level, the top bestsellers and putting them up here. But they don't really do a whole lot for all those people that kind of fall in the middle. And for me, Author Nation, I think fills that gap. They teach you how to get from that debut novel to the bestseller list. All those steps, all those things you have to do in between to make it happen. You can find it there.
This is not a
Yeah.
paid
I
endorsement, just so you know.
no, no, yeah. I mean, I had a blast. There were a lot of people there, sessions going on all the time, always somebody to talk to, something you can learn. And, being in the indie space for a while, I met a lot of people in person that I'd only ever talked to
Sure.
online. So it was great. Like I learned a lot of things. I talked to a lot of people. Of course, I got to hang out with the Writers Inc. Podcast crew. We did a live recording there, which was amazing. And
Cool.
I'm looking forward to going again.
Also, are you going to go back next year, JD?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, my next call today is with Joe from
Okay.
Author Nation to work on programming.
Outstanding. Well, that's good to hear. I'm curious you don't have to like mention who, but who would tell you to stay away from 20 books? I find that interesting.
Oh, all the big publishers, they don't want their authors. If you're traditionally published, they don't want to see you at 20 bucks.
Really?
For
Why
a
is
lot of
that?
it, I mean, it basically, well, it completely contradicts the traditional model, right? I mean, they're teaching you how to do it all on your own. They don't want authors
Oh,
to really learn how to do that. Um, and honestly, the other factors, like a lot of people don't believe you should have to publish 20 books to even get to 50K. Like you can, you shouldn't have to do that many. There's a lot of conflicting things out there. I'm thrilled that they rebranded because I feel like the whole world is changing on the publishing side. It's the waters are getting very murky between traditional and
right.
indie and hybrid. Like what I'm doing now with Simon and Schuster. Like there are so many different ways to get a book out there in front of people. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. She just raised her hand and said, "I'm not talking to any of the publishers anymore. I'm going to put this out all by myself directly through Target. Have a nice day." And all of a sudden, she's indie publishing in a brand new way.
Right, but Taylor's got the horsepower, she's got all of her Swifties behind her where she could write anything and they're gonna buy it. That's star power there. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But like you said, that is interesting. She's pretty much flipping off the trad publishers. It's like, hey, I don't need you. Why do I need you?
Yeah. And we were talking about a news story there when we did our podcast that, indie publishing is growing by a lot. It's twice as much as it was 10 years ago in terms of profitability, whereas traditional publishing, or as JD was calling it, legacy publishing, I don't know if
Legacy,
that's
yes.
something we're starting, had actually decreased a bit. So, yeah, I think things are definitely shifting.
Yeah, there you can feel it. So yeah, it's interesting. Stay tuned, I guess. I went
Yeah.
to all the 20 books from 2017 up until last year, and I absolutely had a blast. But Craig was the ringleader of that, and health reasons and some other reasons, he handed the reins over to Joe, and I'm glad to see it's moving in a positive direction. That makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is awesome. All right. So, would you kill a stranger to save your partner? I love that line. JD, where did you come up with that?
It's one of those things. I've got this long document on my phone, literally just called ideas. And like that sentence was in there for like the longest time. Yeah, you're referring to Behind a Closed Door, my
Yes.
last novel. The two main characters in that book, Brendan and Abby Hollander, I had their character sketches. Like I knew who they were for like the longest time, but I didn't have a story to put them into. And then when the story hit, I kind of dropped them into the middle of that mix. I tend to have, multiple pieces of things, and it kind of comes together sort of like chocolate and peanut butter when it's time to actually write.
So you come up with an idea, maybe you wake up in the morning and it's like, hey, that would be good in a book, and you just kind of throw it in your phone, hey?
Yeah, I mean, with these two, Brendan and Abby, like they're basically a couple that's been married for about 10 years. They still love each other, but they're sort of leading separate lives. They both have jobs. They see each other first thing in the morning, again at night. Then they kind of go through the rest of their day, and they've drifted apart over the years. And at the beginning of the story, Brendan had a little bit of a slip up. He didn't actually cheat, but he came really close. He
Right.
told Abby about it, and they basically decided we want to try and save this thing. So the book starts off with them, sitting on the couch at a therapist office, trying to keep their marriage alive. And like I knew I wanted to do that particular story, but I didn't know where I wanted to go with it. And to give you an idea of how these things come together, my wife does a lot of real estate. I think we've talked about that in the past.
Yes.
She bought a house in Georgia, and it's a really big house, sitting up on top of a mountain. It's got, I think it was 7 bathrooms in it. I forget how many bedrooms, but one night over dinner we were talking about it, and I had mentioned using a company called Bath Fitters to renovate the bathrooms because she had
Yeah.
to do kind of like a full
I use
reno on the
bath
house.
fitters. Yep.
Uh, yeah, so bath fitters, we've all seen the commercials. They come into your house in one day and they kind of give it a little retrofit.
Yep.
If you don't have to do anything besides cosmetic, you're okay. So we basically had that conversation over dinner. We didn't type bath fitters into any devices, but that night we both started seeing ads for bath fitters on our phones and our social media feeds. I was watching Hulu, a bath fitters commercial came up. So I started researching that and then realized in the terms of service for our phones, Android or iPhone, we give them permission to listen 24/7. So right now our phones are, mine's sitting right in front of me. It's listening to this conversation. It's grabbing keywords out of the air. It's dropping that into a database and trying to figure out how to use that to monetize it and send advertising my way. So I started thinking about what happens if that information gets into the wrong hands, the people that are controlling it. So I took that idea, blended it together with Brendan and Abby, and just hit the ground running.
Yeah, no, I think it was such a good book. I really enjoyed it. I listened to it. I got the audio version, and your narrator knocked it out of the park, I thought. Just really,
Yeah,
really good.
I asked Eduardo Ballerini did that one. He did my Forum K trilogy. He was one of the two narrators on that. We won a ton of awards, and he's just fantastic. Scott Brick and Eduardo are probably my two favorites. So I requested him on this one. I just felt like he would be the right guy.
Yeah, and it's and like I said, it worked. That was really, really good. So, you know, one thing when I was listening to the book was, it's like how much is too much in a book or media? It seems like the mainstream has backed away from like graphic sex scenes and movies and maybe books as well. They used to be commonplace. How far is too far, do you think?
Well, honestly, that's why I wrote this particular book at this time. So I'm in close contact with my film and TV agent, and he regularly sends me an email that summarizes what people in Hollywood are actually looking for. And sex in cinema, if you think of it as a pendulum, a lot of the people on the Hollywood side feel that it swung a little too far into the opposite direction to the safe zone, which is why you don't see it a whole lot.
Right.
But they know that all this stuff is secular, so they are actually looking for products to bring it back. So they and they harken back to like stuff like Basic Instinct and Fatal Attraction, like those types of movies. Like this is cyclical, so they feel that that's coming back around in Hollywood. So I gave them a book, a story that that fit that line, and it was one of those things. I knew either everybody was going to ignore it and I would get canceled, or it was going to work out really well. And we sold the film and TV option before we even sold the publishing rights. It went very quickly.
So is the movie being made as we speak, or where are we at with all that?
It's at they've got a writer on it right now. They've got some stars attached to it, so it's moving forward. I've got 8 different projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell.
Yeah.
They're all kind of trucking along at their own pace. This one is honestly moving faster than any of the other ones. I've got a feeling we're going to see it on the screen before any of the other ones happen.
Are you able to say who the actor or actresses would be in this movie or not?
I am not.
Oh,
The people in Hollywood are so protective of that stuff, and I
sure.
don't get it. Like because like I want to shout it from the top of the nearest building or mountaintop, but yeah, I'm not allowed. So until they actually come out publicly and say these kind of things, I'm not allowed to share anything. I think they just want to be first. They want to
Sure.
control the message. They want to put it out, in their own way.
Well, let me ask you this. How much input do you have into the movie and the writing that goes into it, and even, like picking the actors or actresses?
For the most part, very little. I'm an executive producer on everything, but it's basically just a title. Like they
Okay.
don't pick up the phone and call me, for advice on it. They typically keep the writers, at arm's length because they've got their machine, they've got their certain people they want to work with, and us as writers, like that's not our world, and they don't want us to get mixed up in it. We're just going to slow it down. It can happen though. I mean, I can give you an example. So my 4MK trilogy is with Lionsgate. And they sent me over the initial screenplays and the ideas coming out of the writers. And when I started reading it, the writer had changed a lot of stuff. He gave my lead detective a daughter, which I was okay with. That I guess that makes sense if you're doing
All right.
TV. But then he had my serial killer was keeping his victims in a giant acrylic plastic cage. Which if you've ever seen
Okay.
You on Netflix, which is essentially what the serial killer on that show does, so like I raised my hand on that and said we can't copy something that already exists. It makes zero sense to go there, and we've got a
Right.
a very complete story here. There's no reason to decrypt from other people, but so in that case I nixed it. So you can do it if you have to, but I try to stay away from it as much as possible.
you know, when I was brand new to this, I thought to myself, man, it would be so cool to get, my book bought, somebody buys the options, like Netflix or, Apple or whoever, and, gets made into a, made for TV movie or whatever, streaming service. And then as got more and more into this business, like you said, Hollywood hell. Oh my God, the stories I hear, it's like the day of filming is like, yeah, no, we don't want this anymore, or whatever. It can be an emotional roller coaster, and nothing is real until it's like on your TV or up on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this one on Writers Inc., but A
Yeah.
Caller's Game, which is one of my other books, Ridley Scott's company picked that up almost right away. And at one point, I got a phone call from my agent, and he said Jennifer Garner is interested and she wants to do this. Jennifer Garner has what's called a first look deal with Netflix.
Okay.
So Netflix was immediately on board. They brought in $100 million budget. All of this stuff played out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then I got a phone call from my agent again. Jennifer Garner, due to scheduling conflicts, is no longer able to do this. That means Jennifer Garner goes away, Netflix goes away, the $100 million budget goes away.
Bum, bum,
So all of this
bum.
stuff plays out over a couple of weeks, and that essentially sums up everything that happens in Hollywood. It's a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of good, a lot of bad. Yeah, I write books with James Patterson. He wrote that book with Bill Clinton. The President is Missing.
Yeah.
They started filming that. They had 4 episodes in the can, and then they pulled the plug on it when COVID hit and decided not to pick it back up again after COVID. So yeah, like you said, until you've got your butt in the seat and you're actually watching it. Salem's Lot for Stephen King. I mean, that was filmed. They put it on a shelf somewhere and almost took the tax write off rather than release it. If he hadn't started a campaign and got enough people screaming about it, that movie wouldn't be out right now.
Wow. It, this really opens my eyes. I have the Cops and Writers Facebook group, and one of my buddies that's a writer, Netflix approached him, or was it Apple? I don't know, one of the streaming services. Hey, we really like your series. He's got a long running series. It's really good. Let's talk. And he says, okay. So, okay, we're going to do Zoom tomorrow at 11 a.m. All right. 11 o'clock, he's in front of his computer. Nothing, nothing. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they call and say, hey, really sorry, Nick. Yeah, we didn't, blah, blah, blah. How about tomorrow? He's like, sure. So then it's like, okay. And of course, they ghost him again. And in strike three, he gets a hold of this person. He says, what's going on? He says, well, we're really busy. Blah. He says, well, what kind of money am I looking at here? He said 100 grand to buy the rights. And he says, he's more or less, he said, F you. Said, you know what? I'd much rather go fishing with my grandkid than wait around for Zoom calls from you and kind of hope, that this may or may not kind of sort of happen, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, wow, that really opened my eyes, like y- again, from the outside looking in, you think to yourself, boy, this is such a cool opportunity. And look, but sometimes it doesn't always work out that way.
And my takeaway from that story is he should have an agent. He should be dealing with
Yeah.
them directly, and
Yeah.
those terms are a lot better when you've got somebody that knows what they're doing negotiating for you.
Yeah, that does make sense. That does make sense. So, as far as going too far in like a book or movies, what do you think is too far? What are the boundaries?
I don't believe there are boundaries in a book. Like if I feel it's part of the story, it needs to be there. I'll put it down on paper. I mean, when I was writing this one, I knew there were going to be sex scenes in the book, but I had to decide, did I want to actually put those on paper or did I want them to literally happen behind a closed door, which is
Right.
how a lot of authors do it. The
Sure.
light shut off, the door closes, you go on to the next chapter. But in order, I think, for readers to to really know these characters to get into the story, I felt like they had to be in the room with Brendan and Abby. They had to understand what was working and what wasn't and why. And I think a lot of people probably related to it. I put it all down on paper. You can always cut it later, when you go back through that draft. If you're the writer, you write the whole book, write it out there, put it down on paper, be as graphic as you want. You can always trim it down if it doesn't work later. It's a lot easier for me to do that than it is to, leave it out and try and piece stuff in. But the story to me wouldn't have worked, without that being there.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. And we'll see when it becomes a movie, or yeah, it will become a movie. I'm pretty confident. And like you said, it was very much like, Basic Instinct or Fatal Attraction, kind of along those lines, where there was some really good plot twists that really kept you in the story, and I think that'll work really well. So, how long did you sit on this book after you wrote it?
Um, I mean, I put it out there fairly quickly.
Oh, okay.
There were a lot of things going on with the publishing industry that kind of came into play. I don't think you and I have talked about this, but my agent took it out. I knew that there was probably going to be some interest from the big publishers. Rather than indie publish it, I figured I'd let my agent shop it. So he put it out there, and we were making the rounds, and it looked like it was going to go to auction. We had a couple publishers that were interested in it, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine that works at Penguin Random House, and she said, "Listen, one of our editors is going to bid on your book. When that happens, you need to turn it down." And I asked her why, and she said, "Well, we're about to lay off a bunch of people, including the editor that wants your book."
Oof.
I got a similar phone call from a friend of mine over at HarperCollins, and then they laid off a bunch of people. Like, all these layoffs happened. And if you've ever known an author who had a book picked up by a trad publisher, and the editor, gets let go, that book can end up in limbo for a very long time, possibly indefinitely, depending on your contract,
Right.
and when you get your rights back. So while that was going on, I started back channel conversations with a friend of mine in private equity, through the firm that purchased Simon and Schuster. And ultimately, what came out of those conversations, I created my own imprint, which is now distributed. Simon and Schuster basically handles my print sales and distribution. So I get to operate like an indie. I can put out whatever I want whenever I want, but with Simon and Schuster as the backbone behind it. So to me, that's the perfect world. I don't have to deal with any of those headaches that are going on anymore. So we'll see where it goes, but I'm enjoying it.
Cool. So a good thriller often has some kind of countdown, literally a timer, and this book, you definitely have that in the book. When did you know you wanted this in your story? Or was it just a natural flow? Or did you just like, hey, this is going to be a thriller? I want like some really hard countdown, like a very climactic, on the edge of your seat kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, most of my books I think read that way. It's just the way that I'm wired when I write them.
Mm.
Working with Patterson, and I've dialed that in quite a bit. Like, when I'm writing now, whether it's a book with him or on my own, I can hear him standing behind me, snapping his fingers. Like, pick up the pacing, pick up the pacing. So it's just the way that I happen to write. I think all my stories kind of have that in there.
Yeah, I don't know if it was you or it was another author that said, when you think the when you think that, it's like, okay, this is at risk, this is at stake, notch it up a few more, almost soap opera-ish. The stakes have to be so like, oh my God, if JD doesn't, get the secret codes, the nukes are going to go off, or your wife is going to be dead, or your child, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stakes always have to increase. I think that's kind of a given in a book like this. That being said, I don't think there's anything in this book that couldn't actually happen in real life, and I think that's the most
Yeah.
terrifying part about that story. Like literally, as frightening as it is, that this could happen to somebody tomorrow. The app that's in the story, I actually have a company that's developing that. We're hoping to release it when the movie comes out.
Really? Okay.
So like, yeah, so all of these things could be real.
So, I didn't even think about this. Having an app released with the book, has anybody ever done that? I don't think so.
I don't know.
Like a
I do all
companion.
kinds of weird things.
That's awesome. I think
I
it's a
mean,
great idea.
yeah, I started fishing around to see if it was doable while I was writing the book. Then I landed on the company that was capable of doing it. But developing a solid app takes a long time. When we sold the film rights, my agent specifically carved out that niche to make sure that I got to retain the rights for the app.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with that sort of thing. But yeah, it should release when the movie does. They're pretty close to being done with it now. So at this point, I'd probably sit on it until the movie comes out rather than release it.
Sure.
But that may change. You never know.
If you can have all
Yeah.
these people in the
So
theater playing
this
with
is
their phones.
illuminating for me. So JD's got James Patterson in his head, and I've got JD in his head, snapping my fingers and telling me to push it further. So I'm saying it's just trickle down.
So I'm just thinking to myself, all these people in the theater watching the movie, and they're going to be on their phones with the app at the same time. It's like, hey, what are you doing over there? Well, it's the app that comes with it, of course. But but anyways, in this book, and I don't want to like give too much of it away, but you use magnolia for a safe word. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, you've just ruined it for Chip and Joanna, Is that what you were thinking, or where did that come from?
That's probably why that word popped into my head, just because I watched that show, or I used to watch that show.
Yeah.
It was just some odd word. I don't know. I was just thinking like, what would be a good safe word, and like that was the strangest word that popped into my head, and I felt like that was the one to go with because nobody is going to just scream out Magnolia in the middle of something, unless it is a safe word.
Yeah,
Except for maybe Chip and Joanna. Who knows? Maybe they do.
I'm just envisioning Chip with his baseball hat on backwards. Magnolia, Joanna, Magnolia. God. But anyways, research could be a pain or a joy when it comes to writing a book. What did it look like for this one, JD? Or did you have to do
Primarily
your own
just getting the
research?
tech. No, I mean, I hate doing research.
Yeah.
I prefer the whole making it up part of the process. So I research just enough to get the facts, right, or at least so they sound like they're right. Um, and then I keep going. I sometimes I'll use an expert. I wrote a legal thriller or something that kind of borders on that world. So I had an attorney, like a real attorney, go through it just to make sure that I was right on some of the facts in there. But I try to avoid that kind of stuff. It's more fun just to make it up.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the scenes, I think it's the main character is shopping at Victoria's Secret, for his wife. That's one of the things that he had to do. And it is so damn awkward. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Because I know I have. You're just like, oh my God, this is just so embarrassing.
Oh, and anytime, yes, I have. I think any guy that has ever gone into Victoria's Secret to buy something for their wife, you feel weird, just walking by that store, stepping foot in
Yeah.
it, you feel even stranger. I
Yes.
mean, but the employees are fantastic at making you feel like you should be there, and like they help you out and they get you in and out as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, for guys, it's weird. So I wanted to include that.
Yeah. This just brings me back years ago. It's Christmas time. I'm shopping with a buddy of mine at the mall, and he says, oh, my girlfriend loves this Victoria's Secret perfume. And I'm like, all right. He says, do we go in? I'm like, well, it's not going to come to us. We have to go in, dude. So we go in there, and of course, you're surrounded by all this stuff, and it's a little embarrassing. And he's like, yeah, I'm here for perfume for my sister. And I'm like, oh, come on. And I'm trying to keep a straight face because, of course, the clerk was super hot and he's hitting on the clerk. And he said, yeah, my sister really likes this perfume. And right away she could tell it's like, this guy's full of shit. It's like, no, but whatever. So he buys the perfume. We get out there and he hands me the bag. And I'm like, what are you doing? says, well, I'm not going to walk around a mall with a Victoria's Secret bag. And I'm just like, dude, come on. It's like, and I'm like, hey, it's a badge of honor. I'll take it. I don't care. It's like, I got no problem with it. So I thought that was funny. And the opening scene in the psychiatrist's office, where the wife is self-publishing a book, or she self-published a book. She got the attention of an agent. She quit her regular job, and she's having troubles with the second effort. It's kind of like sophomore syndrome. A lot of musicians have had that, where they've had their entire life to have that one album, and then their producer or the record label says, hey, you got 9 months for number two. Is that a real thing for you?
It wasn't necessarily for me because I'd been in this industry for over 20 years before I published my first book. But I've known plenty of people like that. You've got a lifetime to write the first book, 6 months to turn out the second one. And then you have to keep them coming one after the other after the other. And that can be very difficult. It can be intimidating. You typically don't have a deadline on that first book, but you probably will on the second book. And a lot of people aren't used to that kind of pressure. So I wanted to include all those types of feelings, in Abby.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that because that struck home, and I like the self-published author angle in there. I don't think I've ever read that in a book before, so I really like that. So for both of you guys, kind of along the same vein, what do you do to get motivated or unstuck if you are stuck when you're writing?
Well, I think you have to figure out what the reason is that you're not motivated or stuck. I think if you're burnt out, you should take a break. If you've been writing 8 hours a day for multiple days, you probably need to rest. I know some people that do that, and I think you kind of do have to limit. When I'm past 4 hours of writing, it makes it harder the next day to get going again.
Sure.
In terms of stuck, I guess you have to look at why are you stuck? Is it panic? Is what you're writing boring? My cure for that, if it's not burnout, is just to keep writing.
Okay. How about you,
Maybe
JD?
try to have some
Or
fun.
do you
while
even
you're
ever
writing.
get stuck? You turn on a
No,
lot
I
of
mean,
material.
I get stuck as much as the next guy. I've learned to pace myself over the years. I get up first thing in the morning. I start writing around 7 in the morning, and I'm usually finished with the words. That portion of my day by about 10:30 or 11. Like Christine said, if I go like I can keep going 5, 6, 7, 8 hours if I want to,
Yeah.
but chances are most of those extra words are going to end up getting cut the next day because they're just not as good. Like the good stuff tends to come out in those first few hours. So I do 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I know what my limit is, and I pace myself. And I've had plenty of friends that kind of go the other route. They hit the ground, really hard. They will do like a marathon, 8, 10, 12-hour session. They get 6, 7, 10,000 words, but they're completely burnt out by the end of the day. And the next day they sit down in front of their computer again, and they look at that blank screen, and they've got no idea what to do next. So I prefer, just to pace myself a little bit. I know what my time is going to be, when my quitting time is. I tend to stop in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a paragraph, already knowing what comes next,
Okay.
which kind of takes that off my shoulders. I spend the rest of the day kind of thinking about it because I know what comes next in the story. So my brain kind of works out, beyond that. And then when I start again the next day, it's that much easier. I think that to sustain yourself in this business, to just keep going year after year, you have to pace yourself.
All right. Now, Christine, you and JD wrote a book together. Heavy Are the Stones.
We did. Yeah.
What did that look like? What was your process?
Well, I think JD can talk a little bit about this too, but as you know, he's launched a co-author line, which is a bit more like a mentorship. So, I pitched him a couple of ideas. He picked the one he liked. I wrote him a back of the book blurb, which was probably the hardest part. I don't know.
I know, isn't that weird?
Before I got started.
Those 3 paragraphs, you get done writing 60 or
Yeah.
70,000 words, and it's like, God, these 3 paragraphs are so tough.
Yeah, getting it distilled down to that high
Yep.
concept, emotion, right? That's the hard part. And then did an outline, getting feedback from JD. The outline was probably the second hardest part. That probably took like a month. And then once that was done, I started writing. So I would write, and then every few chapters, once a month, I'd send JD a chunk. He'd give me feedback. I'd fix things, go on. So it was kind of a mentorship relationship like that until the end, which is different than the project that we're doing now. That's very much more collaborative. So it was
Okay.
great. It was like writers boot camp, and I learned a lot, and we got a good book out of it.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I've co-authored with a lot of different people. I mean, I wrote the prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family. I've written 5 at this point with James Patterson. Prior to publishing my own books, I was working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, and a lot of that was collaborations or writing memoirs for other people. I love working with newer authors because teaching them things that I've learned, it helps me recharge my batteries.
Okay.
So for years, I worked as a mentor. Like I would charge people, and I would help them get through the writing process. I would teach them how to write a book. But I always felt icky charging people, like it didn't feel right. But
Right.
I kind of needed to do it because it worked as a gatekeeper. It kept the riffraff out, and only the
Sure.
real serious people kind of applied for it. But it didn't feel right. So I just, ultimately, I flipped the model on its head. So instead of charging the authors for a mentorship, I pay them to write a book. But I walk them through every step of it, and then in the end, I own the book. I put it out through my imprint with Simon and Schuster. So they basically get a big learning curve through it, a good education. And then on the flip side, the book comes out, in a lot of places they might not be able to get to on their
Right.
own.
Absolutely.
I'm able to get in the grocery stores, the Costco's, airports, all those different places. I'm published in 150 different countries, so the books make it out into that world too. So for somebody like Christine, next time she shops her own book, a solo project, she's already a known commodity when it comes to places like Spain and Bulgaria and Russia and all these other countries. They've already got a track record established with her, so it just makes it easier for for up and coming authors.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of you, why don't you tell us what this story is about? Heavy Are the Stones.
Well, JD has like 8 projects going on, so he probably forgets. So I
Yeah.
can take this one. So basically, it's a serial killer thriller, and
Yay.
leans heavily into that nostalgia of all those serial killer shows and books we loved growing up, like Silence of the Lambs and Seven, but with a very fresh and modern twist, very high-tech twist on it. So the protagonist, Jenna Campbell, is a detective in Pittsburgh, and it's coming up on the 5th anniversary of when she put a notorious serial killer behind bars. So as this is going on, she's got this on her mind, like he's a very old school, physically imposing serial killer. They've dubbed him the Leviticus killer in the media because of how he killed his victims, which was by stoning them to death. And with his 5-year anniversary coming up, this stranger appears on social media calling himself Azrael, and he takes responsibility for a high-tech killing and demands the release of this Leviticus killer, or he's going to unleash 10 days of deadly plague-style killing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's hinting at that he knows that Jenna did something outside of the law, not quite ethical, to put the Leviticus killer away. So he knows something about this. So she is contending with the old school, physical serial killer, the new school high-tech killer who's planned everything in advance, and the truth about what she did. She has to face all that to save lives. So that's basically the premise of the book.
So there's like massive like death that could happen, if she
There's
doesn't
so much
act.
death.
There's massive plague of locusts, floods, whatever, and
You got it. Yeah.
also there's the personal side of, this guy's got dirt on me that could
Yeah.
potentially end my career or maybe
Right.
me.
Exactly.
Is that okay? That's the vibe I'm getting. That sounds really good. Those stones are
Yeah.
heavy, damn it.
They're very heavy. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, well, congratulations. When does that book come out?
In 6 days as we're recording this, so November 26th.
November 26th.
Coming
All right.
out.
So I imagine it will be wide anywhere where you can buy a book, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, good luck. When's the audio coming out? Is there going to be an audio version?
Same time.
Yeah, same day.
Same day? Okay. I'll have to pick
Yeah.
that
Yep.
up for sure. That sounds good. Now, Christine, you're a neuropsychologist, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
How much of your work there went into your writing, do you think, or goes into your writing?
I think I can't help but put
Yeah.
in my writing, not a lot of the neuro side in this one, but I started my career in a downtown Detroit hospital. And when I was starting out, they would put me on the psychology psychiatric rotation. So I would just go fix stuff. And you saw some people. I saw some scary people when I was down there. And you can imagine their psychology and maybe what they might do in their spare time that you don't know about. So
And as a writer, your writer brain goes into overdrive. It's like, all right, cool. Let's have some fun with this.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm like, what would this personality test look like if you were going to fill it out? So like those kind of things, of course, come into the book. I've got some fake like psych reports and assessments and those type of things, which are obviously
Cool.
very based on what I know from my career.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
This is one of the reasons why I love working with co-authors, because Christine brings a whole element to the book that I could never do on my own. I mean, I could fake my way through it like we were talking about. I could research just enough to be able to get it down on paper, but the authenticity that she can bring to it, it's unmatched. So, it allows the two of us together to create something that neither of us could ever create on our own.
That's outstanding. Well, good for you. And we are approaching the holiday season. Either one of you, what are some good guidelines for releasing a book this time of year? And we could go indie versus trad. I know there's different frames of thought with that.
I'm a chaos demon. I just release whenever. So JD might have a better answer.
JD,
for that
help us out here.
I mean, I don't do anything differently depending on the time of the year. I mean, maybe I should adjust for Christmas time and stocking stuffers and all that kind of stuff. But I essentially, at this point, I mean, I think it's 9 different books that are in the pipeline. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that I use, and I just kind of duplicate for each book, and I just plug in the title and the release date up at the top. And as soon as I plug in that release date, it automatically it updates like all the dates on all these tasks below. There's probably 200 different things on there that I do. Everything from adding it to the website and that kind of stuff to setting up Goodreads giveaways and Facebook ads and Amazon ads. Like all those things take place at certain times. So then I just check those spreadsheets. I mean, every day I've got a little reminder to run through all of them and kind of do whatever needs to happen on those.
Now, what would you say? I know, like before Christmas, traditional publishing traditionally would really push, releases right around Christmas time and spend a lot of money on ads, etc. As an indie, do you think it would be better to wait until that kind of like settles down, or maybe ride some coattails and hopefully get some exposure that way?
I mean, my ads are tricky. I mean, anybody doing Facebook ads over the last couple of months, just because of the election coming up, probably saw a huge spike in their cost, because we were competing against those too. Not just other books, and you're competing against everybody trying to buy ads. One of the unique problems I run into is writing with James Patterson is when we've got a book coming out together. Little Brown, his publisher, goes out there and they run Facebook ads and they target my name along with other things. So if I try to create Facebook ads and run them at the same time, I might end up bidding $3, to put out a Facebook ad. So like it's not cost effective for me. So that's probably the only thing that I really adjust based on that kind of thing. You can try. I don't know that you can time a book release. Like you can try, but I don't know that it makes sense. I think you just need to put it out when you feel that it needs to come out and just kind of be done with it. I mean, I'll check release schedules to see what other competitive titles are coming out on the same day.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't think you've got a whole lot of control over it. And right now, I've got almost a book coming out every month. So to try and time that around any kind of event, I think it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Do you think this differs by genre? Because I know, romance is number one, and there's going to be a ton of romance books coming out around Christmas time. And there's like Christmas romance. There's all kinds of subgenres with that too. I just don't want to get, what I'm doing is I'm releasing a book. It'll be done before Christmas. And I'm just wondering, should I wait and mine's a serial killer vigilante genre.
Well,
So
I think one of the things you see, the traditional publishers, they do target, based on dates, but it's because their entire model is set up that way. They want to hit that New York Times list, so they take all their advertising dollars, all their activities, everything gets pushed towards release week, and you get this peak in all of their activities, which is one of the things I feel that they fail at, because if you look at the indie author model, you can quietly release a book and then you can build behind it. You can create create Facebook ads, you can create Amazon ads, you can go into KU, you can create interest in that book, and that book can do well for you for years, a nice steady, sales record, like rather than having that one big peak, where it comes and goes and then it's done.
Right.
You can have nice steady sales over time. So I tend to approach even my stuff coming out through Simon and Schuster, even though it's technically a traditional model, I treat it as if it's an indie published title and go for that long haul, not the little peak.
Yeah, I'm going Amazon exclusive to start out with, and I was just wondering, it's like, because other books that I've released, Amazon will give you some love, when you first release the book, and especially if it starts selling, then they take notice of that. But I don't know how much notice they're going to take when everything else is getting swallowed up by the trads.
Well, I can tell you just, from my personal experience, if you go Amazon exclusive, let's say you put a book on release date in KU, that's going to hurt you on the print sales side.
Mhm.
So if you've got a book that's coming out, like, Heavier the Stones is coming out as a hardcover, it's going to be in every bookstore out there. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt those print sales. So I will purposely keep it out of stuff like KU, and it'll go in there probably about 90 days after release, but I want to make sure I at least get those initial print sales. Something else I've learned just talking to the folks over at Simon and Schuster, if you want a book to stay on the shelves at a bookstore, you're actually better off putting it on a paperback. Because most bookstores will order the hardcovers, they'll stock them, and then if they don't sell after the first couple of months, they return them. But a paperback, they will leave that on the shelves for a lot longer time frame. So, if your goal is to get into a bookstore, you may want to think about that too. I mean, it's nice to have a hardcover out there, but the paperback, it's cheaper for them to carry, it takes up less space, and they're more likely to leave it out there for a couple of years versus a few months.
Yeah. See, I really don't care about bookstores. I just want to make as much money as possible. Kindle, I've done well with that, that route as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I try to get all the different buckets. I want KU, I want print, I want audio, I want ebook, I want it all. So, I got to find the right mix to make sure I don't hurt one with the other or vice versa.
Well, and the beautiful part about being in India is you can experiment with this, and it sounds like you
Right.
can too, JD. It's like it's your world either, and if you fail, there's one person to blame, and that's you. So, and if you do well,
Exactly.
it's like, okay, cool, I did it right. But we can experiment. Yay, indies.
Yeah.
So the both of you, what's one of your best pieces of advice for authors? It could be marketing, craft, whatever.
I mean, I think it's the same things you say over and over again. Read widely, write often, have fun. That's probably my best advice. Sometimes we forget to have fun.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was a reader long before I was a writer. I read outside of genre all the time. Behind the Closed Door has a lot of romance in it. That comes from me reading romance. Not from the thrillers that I've read. But I read romance, I read westerns, I read sci-fi. I'm all across the board, and I try to grab little pieces of everything and incorporate it into my own work. For writers, we've harped on this. I think you need to write every single day. Writing to me is like a muscle. You need to exercise it. The more you do, the stronger it gets, and the better you get at it. You can't make a living as an author writing on Saturdays. You can't. I don't think you can even become an author, writing 1 or 2 days a week. Like you need to be committed to it. For me, I have to write every day. Like it's built into me. If I don't, I get itchy. Like I get twitchy about it. I need to get at my desk and I need to work. I think to be a successful author, I think you need to be in that headspace. If writing to you is a task, if it's something you don't want to do, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this. What if you're just like deep into edits? You got your book back from your editor or beta readers and you're just buried and you've got that deadline. Do you still like squeak in a little bit of time to write every day?
I usually don't. I get so hyper focused on a task.
I do
have to
too.
be on it until
I
it
do.
finishes.
Yeah, right.
But I think editing is writing. I'm sure JD can do both, but I can only handle one thing at a time, and it takes all my mental energy and focus.
How about you, JD?
Yeah, I mix it up. Writing is always first thing in the morning from 7 to like 10:30.
Okay.
Editing is always an afternoon thing for me. So yeah, I do a little bit of both.
All right, good on you. You see, I'm with you, Christine, because it's like, oh shit, I've got 80,000 words I've got to edit, and it's like I want to get it done and over with.
Yeah. There's something broken with me though. I'm just insanely task focused. And when I have a task, I'm like a dog with a bone until it's done. I can't give it up. So
All right. Well, let's wrap this up here. Heavy Are the Stones. This is the newest book. It's the collaboration between
Yeah.
J.D. Barker and Christine Daigle. It sounds really good. Sounds right up my alley. Actually, I'm going to have to buy the audio version, of course. So this is the portion of the podcast where I ask you, where can people go to find out more about you and your books?
All of my stuff is on ChristineDaigleBooks.com. So that's easy. All of my social media is at one and the number one at one C Daigle. So that is all my stuff.
Excellent. JD?
I'm pretty easy too. Everything's at jdbarker.com. And social media, it's at jdbarker.
All right. Well, thank you so much to the both of you for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun, and it's always nice catching up with you.
Thanks,
You
Patrick.
too. Good. Thanks for having us.